The foolish took no oil for their lamps, and they found that the door was closed. This, in parable form, is the reality of the soul unprepared when death calls. It's a frightening scene. The door is closed, and the voice comes from within, "I do not know you." A good number of years ago, in the monastery in Italy, as sacristan, I was changing the lamp for the Blessed Sacrament, the little red lamp which has to be renewed every week or so. And there was a little lassie there spending hours in front of the tabernacle. And I whispered to her as I went out of the little alcove where we kept the Blessed Sacrament, "La tua vocazione è di essere questa lampada." Your vocation is to be this lamp. It had an effect, and she orientated her life to contemplation. She actually helped to set up this place, and her traces are all over the walls. She was an artist. A word can actually orientate, but the groundwork is done by the other factor, being exposed to gentle grace without a huge volume of noise, and that's the bit that we don't do. On this day we're feasting the great northern English saint Aidan of Lindisfarne. He did it very well, and in that he's an example to all engaged in the work of the Lord until the end of time. Holy Island, the old Lindisfarne, still stands in the sea, a reminder and a beacon in the dark. This is where it started, but it started there. Not in the noise, but in the risk of being exposed to the sound of silence and the Divine Majesty head on, with no shield of distraction. If that is not there in our life, the other bit can find its way in, doing all except preparing for that perhaps closed door. I remember years ago, actually in France, Father Abbot coming out with this in one chapter. He was preparing us for the risks of life and said this in no uncertain terms, comparing the ways in which one can go into the beyond. There is, of course, the big accident factor, for instance, in the air. But then he went on, "Mais la route est bien plus meurtrière, but the road is far more lethal." And statistically, that is the case. Air traffic control and professional competence limits massively disasters in the air. A few can happen and do, but statistically they are extremely rare compared with, proportionately, what happens on a daily basis on our roads. People crash just like that into eternity. Why? Because, usually, of human error. And the human error is there because we're all at the wheel, not professionals but amateurs. Amateurs facing amateurs at high speed. So we can never presume upon life. Every time we get behind the wheel, we need to have the instinct to pray for protection. With regard to this, then, of not getting there prepared, there is one thing that we need to be aware of. I'll just illustrate it with something that used to happen in college days. It was, when doing theology at Bangor, it was still in early days with regard to modern communications. That's not without importance in this discourse. The way in which study was done was still classical. We were not yet computerized, and therefore long hours were there to take in the Word of God and truth in the old library in Bangor, and learning was calm. Also, recreation was fairly simple, and for instance, one thing we would do would be to hop over between lectures, if there was a sufficient break, over the water to Anglesey, the island opposite, which had islands off the island, one of which was precisely a kind of Lindisfarne. We would go there, and when the sea was in, the little church on it, which was open, you could be there as St. Lindisfarne, because it became an island when the sea was in. And if you were there, you heard nothing but the lapping of the waves. The lapping of the waves that St. Kevin, who would have built it, that's the same Kevin as we have in Welsh Cwyfan, and his Cwyfan is the place, would have heard. It was basically the unhurried lapping of the seconds. Time, like an ever-flowing stream, bears all its sons along, says the old hymn which used to be sung often during the war. O God, our help in ages past, our hope for years to come, which would have been sung at many tragic ceremonies, full of tears and memories, early death. So the exposure of the soul to time, again head on, without distractions of modern means, without anything in the pocket which might make a bleep and take us away from reality, is something interesting in the human experience of life. So we had both in those days, going away, hearing time, and then coming back to quiet study. Now, if one looks at a student normally in college days, very little of that is there. Much of the study is done on screen, which has not the same psychological effect, and the recreations are not the same either. Indeed, one does not know now how to recreate naturally. If you look at them at the Mensa or in the place where they might take coffee, what are they doing? They're not interchanging one with another. Each one is interchanging, engaging with his own virtual sphere on the screen before him. And it's all virtual reality, bypassing the real one before us that we never get to know. And those distracting instruments will still be there in bed. Therefore even the night silence has gone. And how many go to bed without even a thought about God, and certainly about the door which one day may be closed because the lamp was not lit.